guys, my name is Amish Tripathi and I'm the director of the Nehru Center. The Nehru Center is the cultural wing of the Indian High Commission in the UK, and we've been in existence for many decades, and we organize wonderful events at this very auditorium, which is in Mayfair in central London. Sadly, as you can see, the auditorium is empty. It has been empty since we were all put into lockdown due to the coronavirus pandemic. But what we Indians believe is that the other side of a crisis is an opportunity. And what we have done at the Nehru Center is moved all our events online. So now if you attend our online events, every single seat is a VIP seat. Like you get a front row at our events. No trouble of parking, no trouble of traveling all the way. And practically all the programs that we would do, like literary discussions and dance performances, musical performances, we are doing them all on our online channels. You can register for our newsletter at our website nehrucenter.org.uk. You don't need to write them down, they will be displayed at the bottom of the screen. You can also come to our Facebook page, which is a verified page, the Nehru Center. You can follow updates on all our events on Twitter as well, the Nehru Center, that's also a verified account. Or you can come to our YouTube channel, again, the Nehru Center. We are nothing if not consistent. I hope you do come to our online channels and enjoy the events that we are putting up for you. Thank you so much for all your love and support. Namaste, Jai Hind.
Namaste. My name is Amish Tripathi. I'm the director of the Nehru Center, as you saw in the video just before. Rarely can someone say that they have known a friend for over a decade and yet discovered things about him, discovered so much more about him that they didn't know earlier. And I can say that about my friend Kabir Bedi. When I read his book, Stories I Must Tell, all of you guys, you must check it out. If we can have Kabir brought up on stage, please.
Hi Amish, how are you?
Kabir, what a pleasure to meet you. I hope Parveen is well. All's good in Mumbai.
All is well in Mumbai. Monsoons have begun, and the COVID situation seems to be a lot better. So the mood is better. The skies are a little darker, and we are celebrating the joy of Bombay monsoon rains right now.
Wonderful. We're going to just jump into your book, but before that, I wanted to read your introduction, and also we'll play the trailer for your book. So there's an introduction for our audiences here in the UK on what the book is about, and then we'll dive right in. So if I may introduce Kabir, not that most of you need an introduction to him, but Kabir Bedi was the original crossover Indian who started out in Hindi films, worked in Hollywood, and became a star right here in Europe. He's known for his roles in the James Bond movie Octopussy, the American series The Bold and the Beautiful, the European series Sandokan, and the Bollywood blockbuster Khoon Bhari Maang with Rekha. His credits include starring with Michael Caine in Ashanti, Roddy McDowall in Thief of Baghdad, and playing the title role in the Italian film The Black Pirate. On American television, he's acted in Highlander, Murder, She Wrote, Magnum P.I., Dynasty, and many HBO miniseries as well. Doesn't get bigger than him. On stage, he starred in John Murrell's Taj at the Luminato Festival in Canada and MMK's The Far Pavilions in London's West End. In India, he has done close to 70 Bollywood films. Kabir lives with his wife, the beautiful Parveen Dosanjh, a producer in Juhu, Mumbai. Kabir, what a pleasure to have you on board. And before we jump into your book, if I may play that trailer with your wonderful voice.
Thank you.
In my heartfelt autobiography, I bare my soul with emotional honesty, with stories about affairs and anxieties, milestones and mistakes, and successes that made India proud. stories of heart-wrenching setbacks and how I survived the roller coaster journey by making, breaking, and remaking as a man. Stories I Must Tell is an emotional experience. I'm pretty sure you'll enjoy Stories I Must Tell, the emotional journey of an actor.
Of you guys, please
Thank you,
check out this book. This book is available in India already through Westland, and those of you who are international publishers who are looking for the rights, please do contact Kabir immediately. Kabir, the first thought when I read this book, what a rich life you've lived. You've lived almost 10 lives in one.
You're right. I have lived many lives in one, traversing many continents and many cities and many professions, actually. Starting out with radio in Delhi and advertising in Bombay, theatre, film, Bollywood, Hollywood, Europe. Many lives in one. It's true. It's true. And I don't know how I survived the journey, but I'm still standing. And I live to tell the tale.
There's this thing that I had heard from among the ancient philosophers that a rich life is in some ways a curse as well, because if you experience a rich life, you experience a lot of grief too.
Of course. I mean, life is not all ha-ha, he-he. Life is, it's a heartbreaking, hilarious, wondrous existence, full of all kinds of ups and downs, pains and pleasures, triumphs and tribulations. And that's what I've captured in my book, because that has been the essence of my life. And I wanted to say it as authentically as I could, as honestly as I could, and say it in a way that would be interesting to read about. That was the challenge I set myself. And when I was writing it, I actually pinned a note in front of me saying, "Don't be afraid of being vulnerable."
One of the things that I got when I read this book is how searingly honest it was, and yet you were very gracious in the way you spoke. There's a line between honesty and brutal honesty. How did you find
Yes.
that middle ground? You're searingly honest in this book. We will go through your life also in detail, but I just
Yes,
this is one of the things
I
that
set out to be honest.
yeah, but you were
I
gracious.
set out to.
You were never rude. I mean, even the people that you speak of, you were gracious and kind. How do you find that balance? It's a difficult balance to strike.
Well, I don't hold any animosity against the people who have been in my life, people that I have known or loved. Relationships may not work out. They're not always happy endings to every relationship. But the fact of the matter is, how do you feel about them at the end of the day? What are the beautiful things that brought you together? How did you survive that separation and yet remain friends? And I have remained friends with all my ex-wives, even after separation, which, as many a divorced man will tell you, is no small achievement. But I have maintained that. So when I wrote, I wanted to write honestly, but I didn't want to be vindictive about it. I didn't want to belittle them. I'm looking at myself, a younger self. I'm looking at them as younger people. We were part of something beautiful, there were passionate moments, intense moments, tumultuous moments, and I've recounted those. But I've recounted those without malice or trying to blame people for things. I've shown what happened. People can draw their own conclusions. Not that everyone is blamed, and I was blameless. The idea is to say, I'm writing about my younger self. I'm writing about the person that I was in transition to becoming the person I am today. I didn't have the wisdom then that I have today. But you do the best you can at that time. And when you remember the time, I think it's important to remember it with compassion, in a sense. But at the same time, being true and being brutally true at times. But still underlying it all there is my sense of we're all human beings. We're on this wonderful journey together, and how can we talk about each other with the passage of time in a way that remains gracious and yet true?
Wonderful. It's great to find, very interesting to find someone who started in Bollywood but doesn't believe in happy endings. Take us through your
Everyone
childhood.
wants happy endings. We all want happy endings. We all want happy endings. But
Take us, sorry, go ahead.
as Faiz Ahmed Faiz said, "Jis afsane ka anjam na ho mumkin." That story which cannot be taken to its conclusion. जिस अफसाने का अंजाम न हो मुमकिन, उसे एक खूबसूरत मोड़ पर छोड़ देना बेहतर.
Ah,
You know,
ah, ah.
so I have tried. If things don't work out, they don't work out. Not all things work out the way they should. But if you can manage, and there is always that time of parting, there's no escaping that. But if at the end of the day, it is something that you end up respecting each other and still being friends and still liking each other, then I think something substantial has been achieved. But the traumas that involved are what I've shared in my book. I think it's important to do that. And because I'm from cinema, we deal in screenplays and we deal in scenes that we have to perform, etc. And so I tend to remember scenes. And even though my book is not structured in a linear form, the way a long story would be, I chose to do it through a series of stories in my book, which in total became the sum total of my life. But the object there is to convey the impact of the moment, the emotion of the moment, the turbulence and anguish of that moment. And that you can only understand if you read the book, because that's difficult to revisit, but it has to be revisited because it was part of my life and it needs to be shared. I didn't intend to sugarcoat it or airbrush it. It needed to be stated as it happened.
Large part of your, as most good things begin right at the beginning. I mean, a large part of your central core, your strength, which has helped you manage the roller coaster of your life, was your childhood. Take us to your relationship with your remarkable mother and your equally remarkable father.
Amish, I was blessed with extraordinary parents. I mean, these are people that met in Oxford, were joined by an idealism for the upliftment of the poor, opposing colonialism, and an English girl, a Punjabi man, who came back to India after graduating from there and could have got the best jobs in the country. But they committed themselves to a cause that they both believed in and sacrificed everything for it. We never had any money in the day. And they created, they really, what they went through was extraordinary. My mother was one of the handpicked satyagrahis of Gandhi. My father was rabble-rousing communist. Both of them transitioned from revolution to religion, which is an extraordinary transformation, which I have catalogued and written about in my book, because each of them went through their cathartic points of change and experiences of change. And what I got from them was that you can live many lives in one life. You don't have to take the tried and tested path. You don't always have to, when my father came back to India, his brother was a judge in the civil service, sessions judge, and he wanted him to follow him into the civil service. My father didn't do that. So I realized that you can choose any path you like. And even though it's not easy, at the end of it, it can be a very fulfilling journey. And the compassion and kindness that my mother taught me, because she went on from being a social worker and a guide to becoming the highest ranked Tibetan Buddhist nun in the world. My father went from being a descendant of Guru Nanak, who was a communist, to becoming a New Age philosopher in Italy. I mean, those are extraordinary transitions and extraordinary people. And yet, between them, there was this amazing bond that sustained them through this journey, though they were parted by continents, differing in beliefs, and yet they remained soulmates to the end of their life. And I found that to be a remarkable story of two remarkable people. And I happen to be blessed to be their son, from what I experienced with them, learned with them, and what they inspired in me.
So, moving on a bit from there, one of the things I discovered about you, which I didn't know, like I'm telling you, all the viewers out here, I've known Kabir for over a decade. I think we met first at the Jaipur Lit Fest, if I'm not mistaken.
That's
I
right.
remember
That's
for
right.
a cold Jaipur
That's right.
night. And I've discovered so many things about you that I didn't know, and I've known you for 10 years. You
Right.
interviewed the
Well,
Beatles. How?
I did.
Take the audience through that.
Well, because my parents had sacrificed a lot in life and never had any money, I had to work my way through college. And so even though I did well enough to get admitted to St. Stephen's College, I essentially worked my way through college. And one of the ways I did that was by freelancing with All India Radio and the newly nascent Indian television, Doordarshan. I also did a bit of tourist guiding on the side because I was a student of history. But when the Beatles came into town, I said, I've got to interview them. So I persuaded my bosses at All India Radio to allow me to give it a shot. They gave me the tape recorder, they gave me the badge, and I got into the Oberoi Intercontinental Hotel where they were staying, and they were on a stopover back from Manila on the 7th of July, 1966. And I found a way to reach their manager. I then pressured the manager into giving me an interview. Actually, he said he'd do the interview because I said the government is doing this. I made it look as though he'd create a huge crisis with the Indian government if he didn't do this. And it was a point of vulnerability. So when I went to see him, he wasn't well. So he walked me across to the room of the Beatles, and there I was. So interesting though the story of how I got the interview itself is even more interesting, which I won't go into out here because we have a lot of ground to cover. But in the same room as the Beatles was like being Alice in Wonderland. I mean, it was the 60s. It was a time of social and political revolutions. The pill had been invented. Counterculture movements were being launched. Flower power was in the air. Turn on, tune in, drop out was anthem of the hippies. Psychedelic clothes and shirts and fashion. And they represented the 60s. They represented to me not just the beautiful music they made, the revolutionary music that they created. They represented that whole era and what it meant to be alive in the 60s, which I think was the most exciting decade of the 20th century, because it was a time of such turmoil and change that changed the consciousness of the world in ways that affected everyone deeply. We're all products of that. And the Beatles were my gods. So that interview actually became a pivotal point in my life, because not only did All India Radio not value it, they even recorded over it because they had no money for tapes for new programs. And the fact that they did that to a Beatles tape so angered me that I decided I was not going to stay on in Delhi. I thought I'd stay on and work in radio, become a producer, presenter, something. I don't want to work with these people. So that interview became a pivotal point that took me out of Delhi, that took me on the road to Mumbai to seek my career in the field of film. I set out to be a director. I ended up being an actor with careers in advertising and theater along the way. But that interview with the Beatles was, I think, one of the most pivotal points of my life.
Yeah,
and I did it when I was all of 20 years old.
Yeah, and you describe it very well, your disappointment and how you got onto the train and the hell with this and you're going to Mumbai. And you did you really have no plan? I mean, that's the impression one gets in the book. You're just going to go to Mumbai and try your luck.
No, I realized. You see, in those days there were no film schools. So if I wanted to train myself in film, I had to make films, and the only way I could make films at somebody else's expense was to make advertising films.
Right.
So I set out to join advertising. And I was very, very lucky in the sense that in radio there was a wonderful man called Janki Gaur. And Janki Gaur was one of these human beings with a huge heart. And when he heard that I was leaving, he said, "Go and meet my friend, a good chap. He's called Jason Dacuna." And Jason Dacuna was the creative chief of Lintas at the time. So I went and met good chap Jason Dacuna. And I got the job as a copywriter, and then moved into the film department. And Alec Padamsee happened to be my boss.
Sorry to cut in.
He was the god of theatre.
Kabir, sorry to cut in, but I believe 4 lady employees of the agency were going to resign if you weren't given a job, apparently.
That's what Jason told me in jest. That 4 ladies from the copy department and 2 designers came in and said, if I wasn't given the job in Lintas, they'd resign. But I think that was more in jest than in truth. But I must have made an impression because he did give me the job. And many things flowed from that again. And I then moved on from Lintas to join Ogilvy and Mather, which in those days was called Benson's. And I worked under the great Frank Simoes and alongside the great Ranjan Kapoor and Suresh Malik, who were all legends in advertising. So I was very lucky to get into advertising at that level and make a success of it. And then, by the most amazing providence in the world, coincidence or serendipity or whatever you call it, Alec Padamsee happens to be my boss. So when he knew that I'd acted in school, acted in college, acted with Joy Michael in Delhi, he tried me out in a play. He loved what he saw, and I got the lead of his next play, which was Tughlaq, Girish Karnad's Tughlaq. And the success of that play led to film offers. So, it's strange how when you close one door behind you, other doors open. And when I walked away from the comfort of Delhi, the city I'd grown up in, all the friends and family that were there, all my college friends at St. Stephen's, I left all that behind to just begin a new life because I thought I wanted to be a director, and Bombay was the only place, Mumbai today, the only place where I could get trained as a filmmaker. So small things have enormous consequences, as I've discovered. And you can never take the smallest instances lightly, because everything has consequences far beyond what we imagine. I can decide to turn left at a certain road because it looks beautiful. I can decide to turn right because it looks crowded and exciting. Each will have their own consequences. Each might take me on a completely different journey in life. So every choice we make has enormous consequences, as I discovered.
Is it because, you were willing to, life pushed you at times you resisted, but you were willing to try new things. Is that what made your life richer? Because you went from advertising to Gluck, you tried something new, and then you got into Bollywood. It wasn't a natural place for you because you don't like singing and dancing.
I didn't like singing and dancing. I didn't see myself
discovered at the
lasting.
beginning, you're not a believer in happy endings necessarily. So
I didn't like singing and dancing, although I must say I greatly enjoy watching song and dance numbers in Bollywood films. I think nobody does song and dance better in the world than Bollywood. I think we're the finest choreographers and dancers in the world, but I was not one of them. I saw myself as wanting to be a director, so I thought, let me be an actor for a while, then the industry will know me and I'll find a way to get into film. Then the Italians came and everything changed. But because I got into Bollywood, I became known as an actor from my first film Kache Dhage, first hit film Kache Dhage. And so when the Italians came into town and asked for a tall, bearded, athletic actor, my name came up. But you're right. I was not afraid to try new things, because I saw in my parents' example that you can choose things that are different, that are off the beaten track, and still make a journey that is interesting, difficult maybe, but fulfilling.
And in fact, even on Sandokan, when they asked you to come all the way to Italy for a trial, they suggested that you pay for the trip.
Yeah,
And
they did.
in a sense, you were actually willing to put money into it.
Well,
Was that bravery, just jumping into the unknown, or did you just like new things?
No, I realized that if I wanted a career as an actor, by then I'd started really liking acting, and then I thought, hey, I can make a go of this professionally. I like the process, I enjoy the process, and I thought if I have to stay in Bollywood, I have to become a singing and dancing star, because there's no way you can become a successful hero in Bollywood if you don't do that. So if I want to move beyond that as an actor, I knew I'd have to go abroad. And even though initially I was insulted by this man saying, come to Italy at your own expense for an audition, I saw the opportunity and I said, yes, I'll come. Absolutely, I'll come. And I went. And then, of course, they put me through all the hoops of riding horses and diving into pools and love scenes and action scenes and makeup tests and costume. I aced all that and got the role. And believe me, they'd been on a 10-city tour of Asia looking for actors. And I was the one that got the role. So they were very keen that an Asian plays this, because the role was that of an Asian pirate who fights the British Empire. And I was chosen in preference to all the other actors that they had in mind, because I'd worked so hard to get the role. I made sure that I did the best I could and aced everything I could. And they were very, I don't know, Italian sense of humor or whatever. Even on my last evening when I was there, they didn't tell me that I'd got the role. Literally, till I was ready to leave for the airport, they said, and by the way, you've got the role. I went, whoa. But I must say one thing, Amish, even though I was thrilled to get the role, it was to be the leading man of a major European co-production was huge. But nobody could possibly have imagined the degree of success to which it got in Italy and across Europe. It broke every existing television record that lasted for decades. And I happened to be the lucky one who played the role of Sandokan and became the face of that success. Of course, it stemmed from the brilliant screenplay written by the director himself, who made all the choices of who will do the music, who will do the camera, who will do the production design. He chose all that, and he chose this unknown actor from India. So I have to thank him, but the fact is, I got the greatest glory because I happened to be Sandokan himself.
Take us through the shooting in Malaysia.
That was an extraordinary experience, because it was very difficult work, and it was something that was physically very strenuous. But there were lots of fun moments, you know. I arrived in Malaysia and I wanted to sample the local cuisine. And I said, all right, I'll try Malaysian fried chicken. And he said, and I got this chicken on the plate that looked like Kentucky fried chicken. I said, what's so Malaysian about this? He said, chicken born in Malaysia, sir. We call it Malaysian fried chicken.
Those are the fun moments in the book.
Yeah. So there are a number of times when I was absolutely exhausted beyond belief, and had to pick myself up and carry on shooting. There were moments of physical danger. There was It wasn't an easy shoot. The most tricky part of the shoot was there were many actors that spoke many languages. So the
Yeah.
Italian actor speaking Italian, the Japanese in Japanese, Philippe Leroy, my buddy Janetz, spoke Italian with a French accent that sounded as though he was speaking French. Hans Kaninenberg, the German, spoke in German. And there was this melange of languages in a single scene.
It's the Tower of
And we
Babel.
just had to. It made acting very difficult because you had to react as though you understood perfectly what they were saying. Of course, I knew the script, but I also needed to know from each one in their sound and their language what was the last word they were going to say, so I would know when to come in. Otherwise, they would just go on speaking, and I'd sort of stop suddenly, and there'd be this awkward pause. So it was. It was something which I managed, and I must thank Bollywood for one thing. Bollywood taught me the art of shooting scenes in very difficult circumstances, because when you're shooting a scene, the camera's on you, but behind there's somebody lounging, scratching his head, there's a dog barking, there's a car passing with horns, and in the middle of this, you're trying to be utterly sincere, or utterly angry, or utterly brilliant, or make these great speeches. To do all that, in spite of all the distractions, Bollywood trained me for that. So when the Italians threw these curves of different languages in a scene, it didn't faze me. I just did it because I was a trained actor by that time.
Yeah, and you had a script. In Bollywood, you don't necessarily get a script beforehand.
No, in Bollywood, in those days, they never gave you a script because, for various reasons. There are good reasons for that, because films are financed by distributors those days. So distributors would give producers a certain amount of money to shoot certain scenes. The producers would shoot the scenes, come back, show it, get more money. But this process went on over a year. Now, the fear was if there were scripts lying around and another company or another filmmaker got hold of your script and you had a great punchline or a great twist at the end of the scene, he might steal it and make it before you. So these things are kept closely guarded secrets. So when you got a narration, you have to make sure you listen very carefully, because you would never, ever get a full narration of the story ever again. You'd be given pages written with dialogue on the set, or if you're lucky, a few days before, and you had to perform them. Nobody would ever give you the overview again because there was no written script, and you had to remember that narration. But the fact is, Bollywood today is far more professional. They're doing far more planned and organized films. But even then, they made more films than anybody else in the world. So they must have been doing something right.
Yeah, I guess managed chaos.
Managed chaos, and they managed chaos very well.
So tell us about your journey to Hollywood.
Well, the European success was extraordinary. It was like the strange irony of interviewing the Beatles in Delhi and then getting almost the same kind of euphoric crowds around me in Europe. It was Beatlemania all over again, but this time I was the center of it. But I decided to move on to Hollywood because every actor wants to see, I want to see what happens in Hollywood. I've done well in Europe. I've worked in Bollywood. Hollywood awaits. So I went off to seek my fame and fortune there. There, of course, it was much harder to do because, firstly, they weren't writing roles for Indians. Secondly, because I could only play foreigners. So rather than being pigeonholed as the Indian, I said, okay, I would play any foreign role. So my first important role was opposite Michael Caine, when I played in Ashanti. And that was a film with wonderful actors. Omar Sharif, William Holden, Rex Harrison, Beverly Johnson. But the story was between Michael Caine, me, and Beverly Johnson, the black actress, who was the focus of the film. So that got me a start. Then I did Thief of Baghdad with Roddy McDowall and Peter Ustinov. There again, I was playing a non-Indian role, but I was a foreigner. And finally, I got an Indian role when I played the villain in the James Bond film Octopussy. And it was a hell of a thrill for an Indian actor to come back to India with the whole Bond crew, shooting in Udaipur
And
amidst
you
the
had a significant
splendor.
role. It wasn't a blink and miss role. It was a significant role in
No,
the
no,
movie.
I fought Roger Moore throughout the film from
Yeah.
start to finish. And we shot in these exotic locations of the Lake Palace in Udaipur and the jungles around there and the streets of the city. And I also shot with them in England, in the train yards and in the circus scenes. And I was there for the entire length of the film in terms of the shooting. Um, that was great. In fact, because they didn't finish the film in time, I missed another great role because The Far Pavilions, which was the first miniseries made by Home Box Office, I'd been cast in the role of Khodadad, the Master of the Horse. This is a story set in British colonial times and about a young British officer who grows up in India thinking he's Indian. Then he discovers his English roots. And this Master of the Horse is the man that brings him up. And I was supposed to play that role. Because the Bond film ran over, they couldn't release me. And it caused me great anguish because I thought I'd missed a career-making role. Ironically, many decades later, I got the same role and played it in the West End of London, in the Shaftesbury Theatre, in the most splendid theatre setting with a live orchestra playing, 1,600 velvet seats, and just the most dream situation for an actor to play a role. So Hollywood, of course, wasn't all fun and games. There were times in between that were very hard when work dried up. And, what happens, Amish, is when you're a celebrity and you establish a certain kind of lifestyle almost, and you think that the money will keep rolling in, everything keep coming, but your bills remain constant, the money is irregular, and these things cause problem. But it's always the Italians that rescued me. The Italians came back to me for more. I did more things, sustained a longer career in Hollywood. And then, of course, doing The Bold and Beautiful, which is seen as a mini-series across the world, again gave me a worldwide fan base.
Yeah.
But I faced some of my most difficult days also in Hollywood. There was a time I actually filed for bankruptcy. And I've written about all the circumstances that took me there. I talk about what it feels like for a celebrity to go through that humiliation and what it means to your life. And more importantly, I've written about what it takes and what you have to do to rise from that ruin and resurrect your life and career and your sense of self. All that is part of my journey in this book.
Let's delve a little bit into the personal life as well. You've been very honest on all your relationships, and in many ways, the relationships you've had, the women you've loved, and would have molded you into who you are today. Take us through your relationships.
Well, there's no way I can take you through my relationships in just by giving you an overview of what happened. Relationships, as you know, are very complicated things, and they have all kinds of dimensions to them. And I had some extraordinary women who I knew and I loved, including Pratima, including Doreen Barbie, later Ishel, Nikki, and now my present wife, Parveen Dosanjh, who's also an amazing, amazing woman, with whom I finally found lasting happiness. But the roller coaster rides, the trials and tribulations of having relationships with women who are divas in a sense. People like Pratima, who went on to build this wonderful village of dance, but at the time was an absolute wild spirit, a force of nature. Nothing could control her, and she was irrepressible. And that was those are the things that attracted me to her. And yet, those are the things that caused me the greatest problems as well. And the journey we shared together was full of laughs, full of crises, full of things that changed my life. And with Parveen as well, I was dealing with an extraordinarily sensitive woman, a very successful star. At the time when I began my relationship with her in Bollywood, she was more successful than me. But when she came to Europe and suddenly had to play second fiddle to me, that created all kinds of strange tensions between us. And also, everyone knows this is no secret that I'm revealing here, but she did have mental health problems. And that in turn caused a lot of drama, a lot of anguish. And then those are things which I can only share with you in my book, because giving an overview is like saying a flight went from Bombay to Delhi without explaining all the turbulence along the way, or the experience of going through that turbulence and what it took to make that safe landing. So there is much that I can talk about, but there's no way I can give you that experience other than say, please read my book. It's all in there. I've told it as authentically, as honestly, as realistically as I can. And I hope you share that journey with me, because you will share the emotional experience of a lifetime that took me from across 3 continents.
And there's a difficult thing you speak of. It's difficult for me to know that also what happened with your son.
Yes.
It's sorry, please go ahead.
No. Amish, it was the most difficult chapter for me to write about my son's suicide and my struggle to prevent it. But again, that is something that we should share. I needed to share because I went through that. But what are your feelings on when you read that chapter?
Difficult for me to talk about. It's a personal thing for me as well. It's
Yes.
I wasn't even sure if I want to bring this up, but this is I know your pain. I don't just sympathize. I empathize with your pain. I know your pain.
Right, and I think it's also,
Yeah.
I wrote this not only as a catharsis for my own pain, not only as something I wanted to reveal, because it's important to know what people in that condition go through, and more importantly, what people who care for them go through, and what it is to struggle with trying to prevent a suicide. It is an absolutely wrenching journey. And should anyone find themselves in that place, it's very important that they have some reference point to know what happened to somebody else in that place. So my life is full of extraordinary triumphs. It's also got these tragedies, and I really want to share that moment, because it's something you have experienced yourself closely in your own life, and I felt for you then, and it's a shared experience, and I feel that it's important. I felt for me it was important to share that experience because it is part of my journey, and those who love me, know me, or are interested in me, or interested in what it is to live the kind of life that I lived, need to know that and share. And I wanted to share that with them.
Yeah, and I guess it's. I think one of the things that's difficult with us Indians is we don't speak of these very difficult experiences, at least in the modern day, and which I guess makes it in some
Yeah,
ways impossible to handle. So what you've done with your courage in sharing is so needed.
there is no undoubtedly a stigma attached to speaking about these things, and I think that stigma should be removed because there is a sense of caring that's needed, both for those who, especially for those who are affected, all the people around them who are affected by it, to know that it's okay to talk about it.
Thank you for that. We're going to have audience questions come up. Please do put your questions. We have the last 10 minutes of the show. But one of the things that occurs to me upon reading your book, Kabir, is in some ways what your director Sergio told you to
Sergio
follow
Salima.
for Sandokan, that just follow your heart. Don't think too
Yes.
much. Have you lived your life that way? And are you actually Sandokan in a way?
I am not Sandokan, but there's a lot of me in Sandokan, and there's a lot of Sandokan in me. There are actually amazing parallels between the life of Sandokan and the life of my parents. Both were Asians, men fighting the British with falling in love with English girls. So those parallels are actually things that gave me strength when I played that role. I thought of their lives and I thought, my father was the original Sandokan. And that inspired me to do much. But I think following your heart is important. But there are times when I've followed my heart and been very compassionate towards a person, even when I should have ended my relationship with them.
Yes.
And I think that cost me. And I'm not necessarily talking only about my known relationships, even relationships that I've not spoken about in my book. There are times it cost me enormously because you can't just be governed by your heart and your sense of compassion. They're all important, but you have to be very careful as to when you apply it, for how long you apply it. There is such a thing as coming to the end of a branch. And I think people will draw their own lessons from what they read in terms of the relationship that I did go through and did write about. So compassion is good, but it has its place. And it has its limitations, and it has to be applied with the application of mind as well.
You need a partnership between your heart and your mind.
I think so. Otherwise, we can get totally emotional about things and do things that really don't serve us.
Satish Desai has a question. Did Kabirji like playing the roles of a villain?
I like playing any roles that are good roles. I like any roles that I can get my teeth into, any roles that make me famous, any roles that pay me well, and any roles that take me towards better films and better roles. As an actor, I've never limited myself to just playing leading roles or supporting roles or villainous roles. I've played all kinds of roles, sometimes out of choice, sometimes out of necessity, but I've enjoyed playing a whole cornucopia of roles in my life, because each is actually an exploration of yourself. Within us all, there is a villain. Within us all is a murderer. Within us all is a hero. Within us all is a saint. Which part of yourself do you awaken? Which part of yourself do you empower? That's what decides your life. And for actors, we can live many other lives through the roles that we play, because while playing those roles, we empower those other parts of ourselves that we normally suppress.
True. I mean, your biggest Bollywood hit, Khun Bari Maang, had you play a out and out villain with?
Well, the thing was, I was shooting in Hawaii with Tom Selleck when I got this call from Rakesh Roshan,
That was for Magnum
who
PI
I
with Tom Selleck.
yes,
Oh,
Magnum PI,
yeah.
and Rakesh said to me, "I've got a role for you in Bollywood," and I said, "Why are you calling me in Hawaii to play a role in Bollywood? Are there no actors in Bollywood? Are they all on strike?" He said, "No, no, Kabir, this role calls for the hero to become a villain. So no heroes are willing to play it. If I put a villain in there, there's no surprise. You're the one guy who can look like a hero and turn out to be a villain if you choose. So if you don't do this role, I won't make the film." I said, "No pressure then. Of course I'll do it. Of course I'll do it," because I knew him and loved him. And it turned out to be my biggest Bollywood hit.
Yeah.
And working opposite Rekha was again a wonderful experience. I mean, she was. I knew Rekha from the day she first came to Mumbai. She lived in Beach House, the same building that I'm today. We were neighbors. And then she was regarded in those days as sort of the ugly duckling of the industry. Nobody took her seriously. But she worked on it, bettered herself, and emerged as a beautiful swan. And by the time I was asked to play the role opposite her, she'd won the National Award for Umrao Jan and had become iconic as an actress. So it was the biggest thrill in the world for me to be called back to India to play opposite Rekha in the film that became my biggest Bollywood hit. I've talked about my book in great detail.
Arundhati has a question. I'm not sure it's worded correctly, but I'll try and translate that for you. She said, "Please give us a comment on how to empower and flaunt our ethnicity working in a foreign land, as you have in America." I'm sure she doesn't mean flaunt as in negatively. I'm sure she
No, I
means
understand.
be proud of who you are as an Indian, and yet work well in Western. If I can add something to that as well, you've worked in so many cultures in India, in Europe, in the US. You've never really forgotten who you are. You're very clearly a proud Indian, but you still meld in very well. How do you find that balance? Just to add a bit to her question.
Well, I was always clear that even when I went abroad and I saw the success, I was always very clear that I would come back to India because this is where I wanted to be. These are the people that I cared about most in the world. Although Italy is also very close to my heart because they've given me more honor than any country in the world. They've knighted me. They made me Cavaliere, the highest civilian honor. But India remains my being, and I always wanted to be here and come back here. I never adopted the American accent because I thought if they want American actors with those accents, there's plenty of them around. I will firstly make my difference, my uniqueness. My USP will be that I'm the foreigner. But the thing was, in those days, it was much harder to do that because so few roles were being written. Today, it makes me immensely proud to see the success of actors like Priyanka Chopra and Irfan Khan, Dev Patel, etc., who are able to work abroad because roles are being written for them. Diversity wasn't an issue then. So yes, it is easier to be true to your ethnicity and get roles, but make no mistake, being in the film business is not an easy business. It is one of the most tough, uncertain, businesses to be in. And this is true for everybody in the film business, but most of all for actors. Today, fortunately, because television's there, OTT platforms have come, a lot more employment is being generated for actors. But imagine what it was like when you're in an industry like Hollywood, which doesn't make even 200 films a year, and you're trying to get one of those roles. So today, with all these different mediums, there are avenues for actors. And I think it's important that people seek those opportunities. If you're willing to commit your best to it and work really hard for it, you can make a success of it. but it's not an easy path, and you've got to be brave and have a lot of courage.
You can make a success as a writer as well. I got to tell you, the book is so lucidly written. The fact
Thank
that
you.
you've actually written a non-fiction, an autobiography, and you put in conversations in there, which makes it easier for for most readers to grasp. It's written very lucidly. It's almost difficult to believe that this is the first thing you've written. Secondly, first book you've written. Secondly, that you struggled with writing this for many years.
I did, Amish. I did because I knew I had a story to tell. I was no doubt about that, but I couldn't figure out how to do it. I'd make many attempts, and I'd throw them away because I got bored. I wanted to write a story that was unputdownable. And when people review my books and say unputdownable, it gives me a great sense of joy because that's what I set out to write. Once I was clear that I could tell my story not as one long rambling saga, but in a series of a number of stories, each complete in themselves, and yet when you add it all together, they are my life. And I could talk with great depth and sincerity and detail about the people that mattered in those stories, and ignore things that were irrelevant to those stories, gave me the freedom to shape my book and gave me a vision of how I could write this book in a way that would be satisfying to me and hopefully very interesting to the reader. So the struggle within me was as long as I didn't know how to write it. But from the moment I did, I wrote it in a fevered passion because it was just dying to come out of me, just bursting to come out of me. And I put it down.
I gotta say, one of the most innovative things about this book, and I can't recommend it to you guys enough, do check it out, is actually the structure. That you didn't, let's both of us hold it together.
Yeah. Amish, let me hold your book together as well. Your latest book, Dharma.
Okay, where's Dharma?
Yeah. I loved your Shiva trilogy. I loved your Shiva trilogy. I loved this one. You've done fabulous work, and I thank you for the advice you gave me on the publishing business, and for telling me how wonderful Westland was, because that's who I published through, and they have been truly magnificent as publishers. Yeah, I couldn't have asked for better.
I'm gonna add some more. One of the things that I love about this is what you actually it has. It's the nub of the book. That's what makes it so interesting. You haven't made it chronological. That at times can be boring. You divided it into stories. So actually,
overlap in time.
Exactly. So we are the universe is not made up of atoms. It's made up of stories. And you've actually, it's such an innovative structure. That's what makes the book interesting. That's why I find it difficult to believe this is your first. You must write a lot more. You have this talent. You're utterly brilliant.
Thank you,
the questions aren't stopping. The questions aren't stopping. If you can give us 5-10 minutes more, can we go through a bit? Sorry, please go ahead.
I said I've taken your advice in the past on other things. I'm going to take your advice on this. I intend to keep writing, and I'm enjoying the process immensely. And with friends like you, I'm sure I'll have the right guidance too.
Thanks, Kabir. Can we take 2 more questions from the audience if you have 5 more minutes? Yes, so there's one from Prashant Kumar. Kabir ji, what are your views on the arrival of so many OTT platforms, and will it give mainstream cinema a hard time?
I am thrilled by the arrival of OTT platforms because they have expanded the nature of cinema. They've taken it from just a regular 2.5 hours slot and given it space to breathe. So you've got longer form stories, which is very exciting. It's also given room for different kinds of stories, different kinds of directors. It's also created a lot of work for actors. So I'm thrilled with the arrival of OTT. I think it's been a wake-up call for cinema. Cinema will always have its place, a gilded place, because that's where it all began in terms of the audiovisual medium of storytelling. And cinema has created some immortal classics which will never be forgotten and will continue to do so. But the run-of-the-mill films in cinema are going to have a much harder time because people have got a lot more choices today, and filmmakers need to be aware that, today audiences can sit at home and watch brilliant films. Therefore, they've got to make something special if people have to step out of their homes and see films in the cinema. Cinema is also seen on OTT platforms. So altogether, it can be a great synergy. And though the lockdowns have forced the closure of many cinema halls, I think cinema halls will come back as a form of specialty viewing for special events where people celebrate families, cuisine, togetherness, sense of communal enjoyment. That can only come from cinemas and from great films. But I think the coming of OTT has energized the entire business, and I'm thrilled by what they're doing.
Wonderful. And the last question, I promise, how have you passed your time in lockdown? Was it a blessing in disguise? Clearly it was, because you finished this book during lockdown. But
yes, my book was written in the lockdown, released in the lockdown, is being read in the lockdown, and is being admired in the lockdown. So I hope, that this lockdown ends. I hope more bookstores open. I hope people can go out and buy books in bookstores, because buying it on Amazon and Flipkart, etc., is good, because they gave you the alternatives. And the bookstores are closed down. Some people like it one way, some people like it the other. But the main thing is, my journey as a writer will continue, lockdowns or no lockdowns. And I must say, I feel deeply sorry for all those who suffered the loss of loved ones in this lockdown. This whole pandemic has changed our world irretrievably. And at the moment, a sense of mourning and loss is the new normal. What the new world that will emerge beyond this, once this pandemic is behind us, we don't know. But it'll be a very different world to the one that existed in January 2020. And we must find ways to adapt to this, because that's what species who survive do. They adapt to changes. And I would like to be part of that adaptation. But more importantly, I have discovered another career for myself, yet one more, which is that of a writer. And I hope that continues too.
Wonderful. Kabir, before we go, if we may request, if Parveen is up to it, if she wants to come and say hi to our audiences right here in the UK. If not, we're going to scream hi from here, and hopefully it'll get to her.
Parveen, are you watching? Are you listening? Can you come and join us? Can you come and say hello?
Okay.
I think you've been called in. You've called in to join us.
Hi, Parveen. How are you?
I'm good. Amish, next time tell me so I can do my makeup.
She looks beautiful even without makeup.
I am so sorry for springing this on you. Ladies and gentlemen, Kabir Bedi, Parveen Dosanjh. What a lovely couple, and what a wonderful book. Check it out. It's available everywhere in India. The stores will open up soon post the lockdown, but it's available on Amazon, Flipkart. The links were there at the bottom of our program. They'll be displayed in the comments section as well. Parveen, Kabir, absolute pleasure. Say, yeah, there's the book. Parveen is a good marketer. Hold the book up.
And I could not have done it without her. She's the one who protected me and made sure that I got it done. And I thank her for it.
She's a lovely, lovely woman, Kabir, and you're lucky to have her. And absolute pleasure having you on the Nehru Center platform. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, Amish. Thank you. An honor to be at the Nehru Center.
you.